I'm Laurel.
And I'm Riley.
And that's Josh.
And this is Tallgrass After Dark.
After dark. Yeah. So, several months ago.
Several
months ago.
Serval, as they would say in Mays County, where I grew up.
In ye olden days.
Serval
We tried
months.
to be relevant.
We were relevant.
Mistake.
We were relevant several months ago.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
But something happened with the audio. I'm not going to name any names.
People are always going to be watching this in posterity. So
Classic estate planning attorneys. Am I right?
Right. You hire
Yeah.
people,
Oh,
they don't do their
snap.
jobs.
Editor's note, this is Jesse. I apologize.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he said it, not me.
yeah.
But
But
anyway.
What were we being relevant about, Josh?
Jeff Bezos going to the moon. He didn't go to the moon. Going to space. But the idea is like, people are trying
Oh
to
my
get
Lord,
out of
Heaven.
here.
I'm sorry. There's a freaking fly, and it's like my best friend. So, pardon.
We've got flies.
Yeah. We're all going to be doing our best
We're gonna be
Mike Pence
swatting.
impersonation this evening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
That's another one of those references that like makes sense now to some
Yeah.
people, but in a few
Become
years.
November
Right. They're going to be
Meetings.
watching this in December going.
What's happening?
Just Google Mike Pence fly. Future people.
That's not.
There will be a Google image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the moon?
Yeah.
No, not the moon. We're
Anyway,
talking about Jeff Bezos.
Space.
all of that made me think
Thoughts.
property, estate planning, my stuff. I want to keep my stuff. How does it start? Like
Wanna
if you
keep
go
your
to the moon.
rocks?
Yeah.
All your
Like
moon
if you're
rocks.
on the moon.
If I'm on the moon, if I am able to go and be one of the people who live on the moon,
The initial moon colony.
right? I'm leaving. Obviously, I'm leaving the state.
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaving.
Maybe.
The
Man,
country.
so that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I don't know how this is
I
gonna
have
work.
An estate plan. This is a thought experiment. It's fun. Let's do it.
Yeah. So what's estate planning on the moon look
yo
like?
ho, yo ho. Maritime law for me.
Okay.
Explain that for the listeners who don't understand what maritime law has to do with space law.
It's something to do with pirates.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to
Maybe.
be. Space pirates. Pirates in space.
Robert De Niro in a dress.
All right. This is
For you
going
Stardust
I
fans.
like this
No,
version
I-
better than the one
Yeah.
we did.
So far, we're nailing it.
Well, okay. So what we talked about last time is, for it to really be a useful conversation in any way, we're probably going to have more than one person. It's going to be a colony of people because usually your property rights are going to be infringed by others, right? Not just by yourself
So
or
are people already there.
the vast emptiness of space. Doesn't care about your moon rock collection, right? Less important. So probably going to be others. How do we defend those rights? And I will also say that the law doesn't like to have to come up with new law. We really like to reach back to precedent if we possibly can. And I think that maritime law or the law of the open oceans, which is not claimed by any country, would probably be most appropriate as we're considering moon law.
So, do you know, and I don't know if you do know the answer to this, so we're both just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. I mean, if I'm a part of, or if I'm part of a group of people that just decide to have property out on a boat in the middle of nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
how does my estate plan work? Who gets to say what happens to that stuff?
Yeah, I know that maritime law is controlled by the federal courts. There's admiralty law that's going to apply, and then that's going to rely pretty extensively on like treaties and
International agreements.
International agreements. Yeah, who the people are that are trying to lay claim, right? Because my rights they matter as we compare them to your rights.
So I wonder, like the two things in my mind as I imagine the space colony are, well, maybe three things. So have I really left the state of Oklahoma? In other words, if I move up there, does Oklahoma's jurisdiction still matter for my stuff there? I doubt that it does, but so much estate planning is defined by state law. There's no really federal estate planning law. So I'd have to tie it to some state.
Okay,
as a
fascinating
point of reference.
thought.
Yeah.
So if you own property in Oklahoma and you own property in Colorado, oftentimes Colorado will insist on having their law applied to your Colorado piece of real estate, and Oklahoma will want to do the same regarding your Oklahoma
So
piece
then it's
of real
just
estate.
a college football game.
So, but then, so
Right.
it, but neither Colorado nor Oklahoma are on the moon.
Agreed.
Right. So
I think you leave your state behind.
So you'd leave. So I think that too. But do you leave your country behind? Right. In the same way that, like, in maritime law, your country matters.
Sure.
Here, like in our thought experiment, let's say there's 100 people all living in this colony together, and initially 100 different countries have sent a representative.
I suspect that we would send groups of people.
Okay, so
I don't anticipate we're going to be like
20
hey,
countries.
yo, Chad, it's you, man. Make it happen.
20 countries have sent 5 people each, right? But the idea is you've got a group of people from a variety of jurisdictions that are intermingling, and in a lot of cases, maybe even sharing certain resources. So the idea that a particular country in their jurisdiction would control a particular person's property on the moon gets messy. And then so we get to the international agreements. I think this might be the kind of case, though, where we do come up with like, hey, listen, this is a novel enough situation that we need like a lunar jurisdiction. There needs to be like moon jurisdiction.
So that's my question is, I'm born in the late 1970s.
Okay.
I grow up, my parents have stuff. I sort of gather stuff, like collect stuff along the way that I think this is my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start to think about how I really have rights to that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like, how does that start? That's why this thought experience matters to me. So, I mean, who gets to decide? Who gets to win? Who gets to be like, okay, this is your stuff. This is your stuff. Who is that?
If your parents were United States citizens, if all of their property was located in the same jurisdiction, if there's no disputing your relationship to them as an heir at law, and if they had a trust or a last will and testament created under a certain jurisdiction's laws, then that jurisdiction, state of Oklahoma, is the answer to your question.
Because that state wants to control the stuff that's in its territory.
But then you get, so in the moon scenario, what does it mean to be in the state's territory?
I just think, I mean, like I say, a person is not an island unto themselves. So they're going to send a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the most sense that they would send resources to be shared amongst that group, like, food, shelter. Those things are going to be shared. So I would imagine that country, I mean, surely there's got to be laws like, okay, so if we think about different countries, right, there's like embassy. Gosh, I was like ambassador headquarters. No, that's not right. Anyway, an embassy. And this would be a really similar question. So you have people from all different states who are residing inside of the embassy, and they're all kind of under the jurisdiction of the United States, but probably not a state in particular. And they're also having to have interactions with this other country.
I imagine there will be kind of like a common law unfolding, because there will be all kinds of things we can't even anticipate, right?
Oh, sure.
So I bet the first...
Like there's going to be precedent about how gravity or a lower or a higher, lower gravity... A different kind of gravity is going to impact like this.
Yeah. I wonder if like the first group that goes is going to be subject to a new multilateral agreement made of the countries who send representatives. And that agreement is going to establish its own rules to deal with this kind of stuff. But it'll be an international law thing like what you were talking about maritime.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But then if it lasts, if people stay there and build new relationships, get married, have kids, property is created, industries are invented. There's gonna be
Britain, and then we were the colonies, and then we became the United States, and we're like, screw you, Britain! I don't need your rules. And the moon's gonna become like its own thing.
Like its own thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, with its own.
You don't understand.
It's almost like we're gonna need to have
tea off of the edge.
a court, a
there's
little
no
lunar court.
That's what
There's
I'm
no
really
water.
struggling. Like, who gets to decide all of this?
Most of what has happened.
Consensus?
Well, so there's two different paths,
Moon country
right?
forever.
And in the United States, it's all kind of gone back to the the English, royalty system, right? The monarchy. But even there were these courts that were controlled by the monarchy and then courts that were controlled by the church. And they had different ways of creating rules and different standards that applied to determining what the remedies were for certain wrongs. And they tended to be a focus on the written law itself versus an evolving standard of what feels just and fair given the facts. The likelihood is we have kind of a starting point in each individual country in an international law to have some written rules. So there'll be a stream of justice that rolls out of that. But then will also be this new court of equity that is lunar based, that is just there to decide what does fair look like in this new situation that raises fact issues that we never could have seen coming and never could have created a rule of law to predict what the outcome should be. So there will be a consensus that's necessary to build in this new situation.
Yeah, but I think ultimately you do have countries negotiating with other countries until we have Team Moon Country forever.
Yeah. And it'll probably involve Earth side determinations, I'll satellite in some Judge Judy face on a screen that's resolving some conflict that's going on up there. The question is going to be who gets to enforce it. Because if somebody on the Earth says, here's what should happen, but the people that are up there are screw that.
Right.
There's almost there's a might makes right kind of situation. Do we need to also send a lunar law enforcement?
Okay, so
that's tasked.
I mean, I really want all the fans out there who are also Star Trek fans to weigh in.
I'm happy to chime in here. It sounds like you're describing the situation that led to the American Revolution. There would be sort of taxation without representation in the sense that what does a judge on Earth really know about living on the moon?
Nothing.
Right. So there will be, even if there were some contingent of law enforcement, how, what's to stop a group of people from overcoming them and saying we're going to establish our own kind of law enforcement martial law system,
I'm very curious suddenly, people who inhabit embassies, are they just kind of all operating on the honor system? Yeah. Or is it kind of like we only send people to embassies that we know are not going to steal from the other people at the embassy. And if you do, you're just you're sent back. You're rejected. You don't get to occupy the embassy anymore. I'm just so intrigued.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Please, if you have ever been at an embassy in a foreign country and you know more than I do, please tell me.
We'd love to hear from you.
Did you have a code that you were supposed to abide by? And if you did not abide by said code, what happened to you?
Oh.
Intrigue.
I believe embassies count as the other country's land. So you would be both crossing a border and committing a crime in another country.
But no, what if you stayed in the embassy and you stole somebody's stapler?
I think you can look, was it the Edward Snowden trial about, wasn't he in the Ecuadorian embassy? And
there never should have been a trial. Free Edward Snowden.
That's
Open the borders. Yes. Whistleblowers are amazing. Liberty, liberty, liberty.
Moon justice.
Forever.
I mean, that is a completely different conversation, which is fun to have with Riley.
Yeah.
But anyways.
But here's
the litmus test on whether or not you're a good person is how you feel about Edward Snowden.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, man.
Do we want to go down that road?
No.
Okay.
I want to go this way. I want to go the direction of there are really things happening right now where people almost enter a new world.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense or from the perspective of the law.
Yeah.
Like polyamory.
I thought you were talking about flat earthers, and I was like, that is a different paradigm. I don't know if it's a whole new world.
Really
You thought he was talking about what?
Flat earthers or something like that.
Really? You went a weird direction. I was thinking birth itself. Just a baby's born. A whole new world. No.
That's just real fluffy. Man.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about legitimate. I've entered a whole new legal world in the sense of maybe there's not a whole lot to say about
the law hasn't caught up to what this is. Gotcha. Or to the degree the law has dealt with it, it's dealt with it in a way that's a little out of date.
Restrictive.
Right. We're trying to force this square into this round hole.
So this is I know this is not necessarily the road we're going down here, but it does introduce there's a lot of different perspectives on what the law does, but two big ones is the law created to incentivize people to conform to some standard we've already decided on, right? Or does the law simply exist to find a way to provide just remedies for evolving situations, right? So like on polyamory, the laws that we have in place about polygamy, right, which is different than polyamory, of course.
Right. There's lots of different relationships.
Right.
But might involve more than just two people.
But polygamy would be, or laws against polygamy would be like, listen, more than two people don't get to get married to each other, which is an example of the law incentivizing people to behave by a certain standard of morality.
If you wanted to like honor the property rights of all individuals involved, do you think you could do it as like a partnership? Like a business entity?
Just so long as you like make soap or something. If you can say that it's just like an actual industry.
Yeah.
So that would be a good stopgap. My liberty-minded argument would be like that doesn't really honor what the actual relationship is among these people.
Fair.
But it would be
their dignity and
yeah. If these 10 people decide to be in a romantic, committed, intimate relationship with one another, why does the law have anything to say about that?
So why does the law have anything to say about anything? It comes in when things go awry, right? Somebody eventually dies or somebody leaves the group. And then we need to figure out, property rights or visitation and how do we continue to support the issue of that relationship. That's when the law has to like play a role because people are not on the same team anymore.
Well, and most of the law is set up when we think about committed, intimate relationships to be about the interests of two people at a time, right? All of our schemes for joint ownership of, real estate, tenants in common, tenants by the entireties, all these things for owning properties, right, are based on most of the time whether or not one or two people own a piece of property. We don't really have a good way of thinking about the rights of multiple spouses at the same time to a piece of property. Like if Laurel and I buy this house and then every year we add another person to our relationship and put them all on the deed, at what point does it become a question of fairness if one spouse from like the original decade passes away and their children should inherit some interest, but just brand new spouse has an equal amount of interest to the same property?
But I think there are ways in which the law does contemplate multiple people having a legal relationship over a piece of property. We just don't necessarily think of it as a romantic relationship, but there are like tenants in common. Many people could own a piece of real estate, or as often does happen when people have not done estate planning, a group of descendants inherit a piece of property and then have wildly different ideas about now what should happen.
What should we do with it?
To that piece of property. And then we have things like partition or quieting title in the name of whoever was actually maintaining the property. So I think, and even, your comment about, well, if other people come into the relationship at some point, do we consider them to be, basically having an equal share in the community property of the relationship? And I think that we, right now, the way the law is, we do. We would say, hey, somebody might have been a stay-at-home parent and somebody might have been the breadwinner, but joint industry made that relationship successful. Yeah. And so it should be considered the belonging of everyone. And so if she came into the relationship or he came into the relationship and only worked for, they were only together for like 3 years. It's
still his property, her property.
It is still their joint communal property, but maybe we pay alimony for a shorter period of time. There was a less period of a loss of opportunity.
Well, I think so. What this illustrates, and I think brings up an interesting question for us, is when it comes to estate planning, especially if you're working with really good estate planning attorneys like Riley and Laurel from Tallgrass Estate Planning, there's a difference between what the default of the law is and what you and your particular group of people want to plan for.
Oh,
right?
that's fair.
So like, we don't really need to think necessarily if we had a polycule, right, which is what a group of like a polyamorous group is called. If we had a polycule come in and say, listen, we're 5 people with 7 kids in committed intimate relationships that involve a variety of pieces of real estate and interests, et cetera, we wouldn't need to worry about the default of what the law would do if you all died without a plan. We would just simply say, cool, what kind of plan do you want to create? If only one of you is considered, or 2 of you is considered to be the legally married people, because the law doesn't recognize the rest of your marriages as anything that has any legal significance, we can still create a trust or some scheme that does respect that and says if one of us is incapacitated or has passed away, how are we handling custody of children? How are we handling custody of property, benefit of property, the flow of assets, the control of assets, right? Those are things we can all plan for. So what's fun about what we get to do is work with a variety of family structures to say what kind of planning matters to you, regardless of what the default position of the law might be without a plan.
So you're saying that with the law, as you all understand it,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to then leverage the law to then write new laws, essentially, for people. Maybe not law. I mean, I know that words are fraught with meaning.
No, I don't think that's a bad use of it, right?
The law allows for us and gives us the flexibility then to determine what is best for you and your family when you're gone. And we can be creative with that. We have room to do that.
I think ultimately, what you need to do to have a really good plan is to have, one, really good information, and then a really open and honest conversation about what you're concerned about and what you're trying to accomplish. And if we can get enough information and enough of a safe space for people to really have that conversation effectively and fully, then we as the attorneys are able to hear that and take what laws exist currently and achieve the outcome that you are hoping could be achieved.
Like, your use of the word law was not off, I think. I mean, in a certain sense, the law is just a set of rules that the government recognizes as valid and will enforce.
Okay.
Right. So there are laws that will control the distribution of property to certain relationships if you have no plan. But then the law also gives you the option within certain boundaries to create your own rules. But those rules will be respected by, recognized by the government, and enforced by them, right? So essentially what a trust is the opportunity to create the kind of law that Congress didn't, but the government will still recognize and enforce on your behalf.
The kind of law that Congress couldn't, because
they don't know your situation well enough, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm a little sympathetic to Congress, rarely, but in this particular case, I'm a little sympathetic to Congress because, I mean, if I were in the position to have to write the probate code or guardianship rules, which is essentially the rules for everyone who has not created a plan, it would not be perfect. It would not be ideal. It would not capture every situation and nuance and unique value.
It'd be like the one-size-fits-all dress, and then you put it on, you're like, oh,
that doesn't really fit anybody,
right.
You know? So the law says, listen, we've got a one-size-fits-all dress for your estate. You're probably not going to love it. And it's not because we were trying to be jerks. It's like we had to create the lowest common denominator plan, right? So please consider your own people and your own values and create your own. Would much rather you have that on yourself than rely on ours.
And really, that lowest common denominator, what the law understands is you're a person that was married and had kids. And if you're a person that was married and had kids, we have a default situation for you. And if you're anything else, if you are a person who's in a committed relationship, we don't have a default that you're going to love.
No.
If you are a person that has kids, without the law involved, we don't have a default that you're going to love. If you are a person that wants somebody other than you're not in a committed relationship, you're not married, and you don't want your parents to be making your decisions,
You're not going to like
we
our
don't
plan.
have a default
Right.
position you're going to love.
Or
So-
if you're somebody that married a single parent and you got a step kid as part of your situation that you never adopted, and then their biological parent died, and you treat this stepchild like it's your child. This is my kid. This is my son, my daughter. I die, I expect they're going to get everything. They're not, right? There's no legal relationship there that's going to respect that. So you got to create your own plan to make that happen.
Yeah. So it's very, very restrictive.
Yeah.
In the sense of, like, if I win the lottery, this default plan might work for me, but more than likely,
because you're married and you have kids.
right, married, have kids, in the
Yeah.
sense of what they mean by marriage and what they mean by kids.
Right. But if you are, so in a lot of ways, and I mean, Congress has got to
They,
pick a
meaning
pony,
the law,
right?
Lawmakers.
But lawmakers have got to choose a path. But the path that they've chosen is largely based on monogamy and heteronormativity, right? And if that's not your situation, it may not work out the way you would love unless you create your own plan.
But thankfully,
We can do that.
Yeah,
we can
you
do
absolutely
that.
can.
Right. There's ways to say, okay, that's not going to be for me. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
I need to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
I can define what it means to have a spouse and what spouse means for me,
Mm-hmm.
what kids mean to me,
Mm-hmm.
whether biological or not. I can determine that's my kid,
Right.
or that's who I want to get whatever, or that's who I want to decide whatever. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I recently had a client contact me, and they had worked with me 2 years ago. They were two folks who were kind of later in life. They both had their own children. They were in a long-term committed relationship, were not married, didn't have any intention of getting married, but they still wanted to take care of each other. And then they had plans that they wanted for their, each of their individual children. And so we created documents that would accomplish those goals. And then they contacted me a couple weeks ago, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we are going to get married," and they were really excited. And they just wanted to touch base and find out, now that we're getting married, is there anything that we need to think about or change? And really, their goals were the same. They wanted to take care of each other and then take care of their, individual children. And so the documents that we had created before 2 years ago were really going to accomplish exactly what they wanted. The same as now after they're married. And so the only small suggestion that I had was, if you have significant savings in your qualified retirement accounts, you're going to want to talk to your financial advisor and make some decisions about how those are designated. But that was it. They didn't have to really do any significant, they had no amendments they needed to do.
Because they sort of broke the fourth wall of the default law.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. We were already accomplishing
Right.
what their goals were. So now their legal relationship, great. They get to enjoy that. That's fantastic. And maybe the IRS is going to give them a bit of a break when they're filing for taxes.
Yeah, sorry to
but-
say the big difference where you can't really, under current law, you can't get around certain rules that are kind of opposed to polyamory and polygamy is the tax benefits that are written into the law for a spouse are really only going to apply to one person, not to a variety of people. So your first spouse is your spouse as far as the IRS is concerned. But for every other purpose that someone might think of creating an estate plan, we don't need to consider that a restrictive standard.
So the concept of time, what's interesting is we started off talking about space and going to space, and all the time is the intersection of time and, space time.
Mm-hmm.
The law doesn't seem to acknowledge time either. So, and what I mean by that is hear you all talk is one day you can be in love with a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a significant other
Or they friend.
or they friend. Right. Somebody else can be in love with them. And then the next day decide, I want them to be my forever person, in the sense of legally making this binding as, a
Right.
partner in marriage. And all of that can be going on in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
All of that can be going on in between the two people.
Right.
And the law is still going, we don't know anything until what? Right? So, and this is kind of what we've told, people who are engaged to be married.
Yeah.
Oh,
the law doesn't really
think you love each other.
The law doesn't care about your love. Yeah.
Right. But as far as the law is concerned, none of that matters until what?
So if you're actually engaged to be married, and you're wanting to rely on the default laws, you need to actually get married. Otherwise, the law, like we said at the Tulsa Wedding Show, really doesn't care that you super love that person and you're going to be married in like 2.5 years. If that person gets into some kind of an accident, if their utilities are in their own name, you don't get to talk to the utility company or the doctors, right? Unless you have documents in place.
Despite the fact that you
super duper ooper love them.
And decided that in your mind 3 weeks earlier.
Right. It's a meaningless. Yeah. What your perspective on your fiance, on your stepchild, on any variety of objects of your love and affection are relatively meaningless without some kind of legal recognition as parent, as spouse, etc. Right? So, again, there are ways around that, right? If you want this child to be your beneficiary, you can't rely on default provisions in the law. You need to name them as beneficiary in a will or a trust or life insurance policy. If you want this person who you love to be the default decision maker for you financially and medically, even though you're not married, you need to have a power of attorney or something that names them to do that. But you can't rely on lawmakers in your state to think, well, they were super in love, they should have some rights. That doesn't mean anything to the law.
Some people have been together for a really long time. They love each other a whole bunch, but they don't think of themselves as married.
And they don't want
to ever get married.
They're unmarried on purpose and quite happy about it, but in a committed, intimate relationship, right? So
it's really hard for the legislature to parse out those relationships from like, oh no, yeah, we're definitely gonna get married.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't.
Yeah, so I mean that's just weird to me or interesting to me. So
you can say weird. It's weird.
The law sort of has a time of its own, right? You can decide this is my person. I want them making all my decisions whenever you decide that. But until that is something enacted through a contract or something.
Yeah, there's this in just about every kind of relationship, there has to be a standard or a kind of a point that everybody can look to and say, this is when something happened that changed the nature of our dealings with one another. Now, when two people in a domestic partnership are involved, that takes the form of establishing a marriage, whether that's by ceremony and certificate or common law, right? But there has to be a standard we can point to. If it's people in a business relationship they didn't create an LLC or a corporation, but one of them wants to enforce rights against the other, right? What do we got to do to look at their course of dealing and establish the existence of a partnership or something like that?
Yeah, Riley.
Yeah.
Are you down with LLC?
I am. You know me. So if people, one or more people, two or more people are trying to establish the existence of a relationship that has privileges and enforceable rights and remedies associated with it, they first have to establish that the relationship actually exists. So marriage is a point in time that a lawmaker has said that relationship comes with enforceable rights and privileges, not engagement, right? Two friends sitting around and go, won't it be cool if one day we start a business? Doesn't create a partnership, right? That's more like an engagement. Maybe we'll get married. Okay, let's wait and see. No rights until you do. Maybe we'll start a business. Okay, let's wait and see. No rights until you do. So there has to be something that the law can point to and say, this is the moment the relationship existed. And because of that moment, each party now has privileges associated with that relationship and enforceable rights against each other.
Yeah. So what I'm leading up to is you can't rely on the law to default to what you think it ought to default.
Right. You might want to start those rights and privileges sooner than the state would. Right. And you can do that. The state says, sure, if you want to create a different point of reference where rights and privileges exist, go for it. But it's got to be unique to you. And you've got to take definite steps to create it.
And without trying to scare people, one of the scenarios in my mind is, again, it's about time, but not only time, proximity. Let's say, as an example, hypothetically, a couple takes their children on vacation along with
somebody else's kids.
Somebody else's children.
Yeah. That never happens.
Right. That never happens.
Except to us 2 months ago.
And so, this is going to be fun. It's going to be a blast, blah, blah, blah. Hey, we get there. We're going to get back home. We'll be back on the 13th, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But things happen. Things don't go well. Accident. Somebody that's not your child by default.
We're at the water park and a kid slips off the edge of the slide and breaks their arm, right? That didn't happen to us.
This
but
didn't happen.
Yeah, but it has happened to people.
It has happened to people, not to the hypothetical couple.
So
that we're talking about.
The two, I love how you frame the question, because there's two issues there that people think do some heavy lifting and neither one of them do. Laurel and I, let's say it's us on vacation with somebody else's kids. Laurel and I and their parents could all agree that we intend that Laurel and I have the right to make decisions for those kids while we're away. If we need to take one to the doctor or the ER, urgent care, whatever, we can do that. Our intention gets us nowhere. We have no legal authority based on our intention. And proximity also gets us nowhere. Just because we've got possession of those kids does not mean we have the authority to make decisions for them. So, yeah.
I mean, I really sounded smart with the way I framed that question.
You did. You really sounded brilliant. The law does not care about our intentions or our proximity.
All right, so what do we do then?
Yeah.
I mean, people are going to do this, right? Oh, I want to take my best friend with me. All right. You're talking,
Oklahoma allows for a limited power of attorney. So the guardian of the child or the parent of the child could execute this limited power of attorney that is going to be viable, active for this finite period of time, these 4 days where you're taking this kiddo with you on vacation, that would authorize the hospital to provide emergency care, the dentist to put the tooth back in their little pumpkin mouth, whatever thing needed to happen.
Pick up a prescription medication
right
at the pharmacy,
Yeah.
So the temporary power of attorney, and then...
Because one time when I was a child, I broke my arm, and my mom was in Hawaii, and this was back in olden days where we had like fax machines and pages and whatnot.
Whoa.
I know. Wild
Pages.
times. Yeah.
like a pager? Or pages?
Pagers.
Pagers. I thought you said pages. I'm
No,
like, we
we've
still have
always had
pages now.
Yeah, for
Okay.
a long time.
Pages.
Yeah.
We had pages and faxes.
Some pages, y'all. No, we had pagers. Anyway, pagers and fax machines. And so my mom did not complete a limited power of attorney for the person who was providing care to me. And so I sat with a broken arm for several days because it wasn't a life-threatening emergency.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could live with my broken bones. Anyway.
That's not ideal.
It's not my favorite thing. It did swell. It was super duper weird. Yeah, and then when they went to set the bones, okay, this is super weird. Have you ever broken a bone? And then they set the bones, and all of a sudden there's this warm feeling. Like it's kind of creepy, but really cool. I don't know. If you know, you know. But anyway, the point is I had to wait for days. 4 days. And you don't want your little pumpkin waiting for days with their broken bones.
No, so that one's you're not really like an engagement or a partnership. You're not establishing a relationship, but you are making your intentions clear in the form of a written document that's witnessed and notarized, where the parent of the child says, I'm giving my children temporarily to Josh. You're going to go on vacation. And if you need to make a medical decision about them while you're there, you can do it. Nobody can question that you have that authority.
Because the law's not going to, like, say that didn't happen. The law's not going to speculate.
Yeah.
Because that's a mess.
Because there's too many risks.
Yeah.
If
What if you were like, you kidnapped somebody's kid? They don't want you to just be able to
There has to be
have medical care and all.
I've got this child and their parent wants me to. Trust me. Right? That's
This
way
is
too.
legit. Okay.
Yeah. So you get to share that authority with someone, but you got to do it formally. We can't just take each other's word for it.
Yeah. So I think kind of wrapping up, the big lesson is
Don't go to the moon yet because we haven't figured that out.
we haven't figured out the moon.
Yeah.
Or you could go and you could be the one that figures it out.
Or you could go sail for a while and see how that works.
Yeah.
Maritime.
See if you like maritime law.
Sail away. You're welcome.
Was that a little Enya?
There you go. Just set that right up. Nice.
Thanks. Anyway,
What do you call it? What do you call it when Enya tells a dirty joke?
I do not know.
Innuendo. I don't feel real good about that joke. It just came to me, but
Oh, look at you.
You just made that one up?
I just made
That's
that one
pretty
up
good.
right
That's
You
pretty
made that
good.
figure
I like
out.
right
It's out there. All right.
Hashtag I don't believe it.
there.
So, but you wanted to wrap up other things?
I was just
Anything
trying
else?
to.
You're just like, whoa, that was a lot.
No,
It was awesome.
the moon thing. Yeah, Riley.
Yeah. So the moon.
Riley made point one.
Yeah.
Point two.
If you go to a zoo and that zoo only has one animal and that one animal is a dog,
It's not the ark.
it's a Shih Tzu.
I feel like you didn't just come up with that.
I
You
didn't
read
just-
that somewhere.
I didn't come up with
Yeah.
that. I like that one a lot though.
Yeah.
You're fooling us
Watching the
now.
TikToks.
You tricker.
Dad joke TikTok.
It's just way too many good ones.
Lesson one.
Moon.
We don't have the moon figured out.
No.
We can't help you there.
Okay.
But we do
Two.
have polyamory figured out.
Two, you can go and plan with an estate planning attorney, like those attorneys at Tallgrass
Yeah.
Estate Planning.
Where you will be, not only do we know how to deal with that, but one of our core values driving how we function is
Dad jokes.
also dad jokes, but inclusivity. There are people that are in alternative kind of family structures that wonder sometimes if they're going to be welcome or treated oddly or poorly some places. You're welcome here.
Can I say you can come to Tallgrass Estate Planning and work with them to write laws that work for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And then three, it's like, don't think that the law can read your mind.
It can't.
Don't think it's going to read your mind and then also be on the same page. Maybe it reads your mind, but it's not always going to be on the same page.
No, right.
It does not know your intentions. If you're going to do things that could put you in situations where you have other people's children, just get a power of attorney or some kind of temporary thing to make sure your intentions are documented and known.
I mean, I think the
I don't
underlying
wanna scare people, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the underlying principle of everything we do as estate planning attorneys is write it down, right? Like, I don't care if it's
Well, that's every single attorney.
all right. Well, I know,
Please
just
pay
write,
for
not
the
just us,
file.
but write it down.
It's so cliche.
But it's so true. It's not just that I'm going on vacation with somebody else's kids, but it's the retired couple that comes in and we start to talk about estate planning, and they're like, "Oh, no, my kids know what we want to do. It's fine. My kids already know. Like,
How
it
many
doesn't
times have
matter.
you seen that work out?
It doesn't, right? Write it down. And write it down in a way that's going to be enforceable. But just taking for granted, your way of putting it was great. Taking for granted that the law is going to read your mind and then enforce what it reads your mind about. Neither one of those things work.
Man, I feel really good about myself.
You
tonight.
should.
I don't know.
Nailed it.
I'm really
nailed
spending
it.
a lot of time with y'all, and it's like absorbing and stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're an honorary attorney. That's how that works.
Yes.
That doesn't work that way, but whatever.
Yeah. The rules are changing. The American Bar Association now allows attorneys to confer a JD on somebody
Oh.
honorarily.
Can I write a trust that says I'm like the thing?
You are the attorney for the people. Hold yourself out as an attorney in the community.
You're our apprentice.
Well, this is a good conversation.
I mean, I agree.
Okay.
I like y'all.
I used to be kind of indecisive,
We're really bad at wrapping,
but now I'm not so sure.
wrapping it. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an awesome conversation.
If I point somewhere, can the subscribe button be there?
Subscribe right here.
Oh wait, I'm in charge of that. I upload to YouTube, so
Oh yeah.
I'm somewhere around
always
here.
wanted to say that.
Subscribe.
Wildly now.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll
You-
be back in 2 weeks.
If you're on the YouTubes, you know where the subscribe button is.